Hi, it's Allison from the Law School Toolbox. Today, I'm excited to have social impact expert and serial connector, Susan McPherson, here with us to talk about the lost art of connecting. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Allison. I am so excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you. Well, to start us off, can you just give our listeners a bit of information about your background so they've got some context here?
Absolutely. Well, I've had probably 10 lives at this point as I'm pushing 60, but I'll kind of give you just a few highlights. I had about 20 years of corporate marketing, public relations, business development experience. When in the mid-aughts, I decided to switch things up and focus on corporate responsibility, social impact, social good, really pushing the private sector to be better. But the one through line all the way since I was a young child up until today was this massive love of making connections, not networking, but building connections and then watching the magic unfold. And in
Awesome.
hindsight, looking back now 30 plus years professionally, I would be nowhere without the connections that I made in my 20s and my 30s and my 40s.
That is so interesting, and I cannot wait to talk with you about it. If people want to learn more about you and reach out, how can they do that?
I'm on all the social channels, platforms, on LinkedIn. I hate to say X, what is formerly known as Twitter, Threads, Instagram. The one kind of area I stay away from is TikTok, just not because I have anything against TikTok, but it's just I don't have enough hands, feet, and legs, right? And then my company is McPherson Strategies. We are a social impact communications firm. McP Strategies is the website. So reach out and say hello.
Awesome. We will link to all of that stuff in the show notes and people can reach out to you. All right. Well, you have already touched on one of the topics we're going to talk about, networking.
Yes.
So many, maybe most law students and young lawyers hate the idea of networking. But you have written a book called The Lost Art of Connecting that really, I think, aims to flip that narrative. What's your approach here?
Well, first of all, let's do away with the terminology of networking for the remaining part of this conversation for the very reason that it makes people feel icky, makes people want to take a shower, and there is no excitement to do it. And I like to think of connecting as less transactional, more meaningful, more listening than talking, which, if you're an introvert, can be a more comfortable place from which to be. And really going for the long haul, not an immediate, like, thank you, ma'am. I can't remember those, the funny, thank you, ma'am.
Slam,
Yes.
bam, thank you, ma'am.
And just to give your listeners an example, I imagine many of them get requests to connect on LinkedIn. Networking is when somebody connects with you and then immediately responds with asking you to buy something or sign
Oh,
up.
I hate
I
that
hate it.
so much.
It's like you
It's got
regret your decision.
no, it's got to the point where if I think they're gonna do that, now I just reject them.
Yeah. But what about instead when they reached out to you that they offered a way to be helpful? So what I'd like to do is, as mentioned, flip the switch on networking to leading with how we can be helpful to others. Now, again, that could send the fear of God in people because people are like, I'm too busy. I can't help you. But we can all be helpful. Not all the time, not every day. But if we lead with how we can be helpful, we walk into rooms virtually or in person, and it gives us the confidence to be able to have conversations because everyone can use a little help.
What do you say to people who are maybe thinking of this in a more hierarchical type of way? So they're thinking, "Oh, well, I'm trying to approach this person who, for whatever reason, I feel like is, above me in the hierarchy. What would I possibly have to help them with?" How do you help people feel comfortable thinking that they actually do have something of value here?
Well, before I go anywhere, even today, because I have imposter syndrome just like everyone else, I think about what my superpowers are. And we all have superpowers. All of us, every single one of us, whether you're 18 or 75. And you think about how those superpowers can come into the fold. Now, I mentioned early on TikTok. Well, yes, there's a reason I don't use TikTok because, quote unquote, I don't have enough time. But I haven't figured out the algorithm. So if
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
25,
with you. I'm like, "TikTok, no, can't do that one, sorry."
okay. But I bet there's a lot of people who are in your generation that may be able to. And when they walk into an event and they're talking to someone like me, that could be a way somebody could be helpful. Okay. But another way to be helpful is just give people information. Share with them a podcast that they might have interest in. Share a nonprofit that you're passionate about or a cause that you're passionate about. It doesn't always have to be that when we think of help, right? Giving people information that could be helpful to them is help, right? So I think it's important for folks as law school students are smart, they're resourceful. When they are having this fear that someone is quote unquote higher than them or more accomplished, this is when it's really important to think about the superpowers they have.
Right, and I think one of those, which we talk with people about, is, you are actually closer in a lot of ways to the material and to the development of the law. So even if you are,
Yeah,
you know, have an interaction with somebody who's a law firm partner, they might not know these cases that you're
no,
reading in law school. They might be happy for you to send them an article that's like, "Hey, I thought of you when I saw this. It came across my radar in my antitrust class." And they're like, "Oh, great. I'll have to
well,
research that."
Allison, that is such a good point, and I think about that could apply, and I know we're talking law school, but in med school, right? I mean, think about this. You think that surgeon has been, doing surgeries for 35 years. Well, you're learning the cutting edge part of surgery.
Right.
So it's very similar in law school. It's a great point.
Well, tell me a little bit more. I know you have kind of a whole process here of gather, ask, do. How do you sort of help people operationalize this if
Sure.
they want to connect?
Yes, of course. Well, the methodology that the book describes is called gather, ask, do. But I want to remind listeners that the underlying notion below it all is leading with how you can be helpful. So just keep that in mind when you hear me describe these three stages. The gather phase, you connect with the most important person in your life, and that is you. And you think about what your superpowers are, because again, you want to lead with how you can be helpful. You also think about what your goals are for the next 1 year, 3 years when you finish law school and have your first or second year experience at a law firm or a corporate engagement. And then you think about how you're going to break that hermetically sealed bubble that all of us live in, myself included, where we tend to attract people who look like us, sound like us, the same age, race, and color as us. To give you the old ancient proverb, a fish can't see water unless it breaks out of its bowl. When I first heard that, it really resonated. Then you move to the ask phase, which is learning to ask the meaningful questions of others so you can find out what their hopes and dreams are. Okay. It also helps when you go to, I'm going to use the word networking events and you're like, what am I going to talk about? But if you ask people questions, you'll find a large majority of people like to talk. So if you
Right.
give them a platform, but when you're asking these questions, you listen for signals on what, again, their hopes and dreams are. And then you can move to the do phase if you listen carefully, which again is a skill. But when you get to the do phase, you become reliable, resourceful, responsible, responsive, all the things that are going to help make you a professional attorney and a good
Yeah.
person.
No, I think that's so key. I think that transition into what does it mean to be a professional? What are the expectations of me? That's such a struggle for so many people. So I think getting explicit about what does that mean? Well, it means
Yeah.
that, you should be responsive to things. It means that you follow up. It means you close the loop. You talk about this, I think, in the book, and we've talked about it before on the podcast. If somebody gives you help, you need to close the loop and follow up and let them know, well,
Yeah.
how did that go? That's what builds these relationships.
And it's over the long term. So the relationships you are starting now could potentially have massive impact on your life 15, 20, 30 years down the road. If somebody had told me in my 20s that I was going to run a company when I turned 48, I would have told you that they were smoking, you know what. I mean, it was so far from anything I would have ever imagined. And now 12 years, 11 and a half years later, I have 15 employees and I've built a successful business.
Well, it's the same. I mean, congratulations to you. And I feel the same way. If somebody had told me in law school I would run a business, I'd be like, are you crazy? Like, I don't have any interest in that. I don't have any aptitude. I don't know anything about that. Why would I even want to do that? And now it turns out it's great. Who knew?
Yeah,
Um,
for you, Allison.
but yeah, I think that is part of this whole conversation is you just don't know where things are going to lead. I met my business partner on the ex Twitter when we had both I was going to write a book, which never happened. And she was, had started a small business of her own and was kind of like, I don't know where this is going. She reached out to me and it turned out we lived a mile apart. So we met for coffee. And then the second time that we ever had lunch, we decided to start this business.
I love that. Love
You know,
that.
it's kind of like a shotgun marriage, but Luckily, she's great. It went well. We're very compatible.
Okay,
But I
good.
mean, it's one of those things, like, if one of us hadn't reached out to just say, "Hey, here's an article." Literally, I think she sent me a blog post that she had done. It was like, "Oh, I
Oh,
see that you're kind of in the same area. Like, here's something I'm thinking about." And at that point, I would talk to anyone who would talk to me because I was just sitting alone at my kitchen table trying to write this book.
oh,
And, yeah, the rest is history. Here we are.
I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. I guess we've already a bit talked about this. Why specifically do you think these are important skills for people to hone?
Because everything happens because of connections, and personally and professionally. And I think if you ask listeners to think back in their lives of all the good things that happened to them, guess what? Came because somebody you had met, somebody you had wanted to meet, somebody you accidentally met. And I think if we were more intentional when we made connections, more good could be happening.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And yeah, I just think you really never know. I mean, I think back
You
to people that
never know,
you never
ever,
know.
ever.
I mean, I think back to people I've known for, 30 years or whatever at this point, and sometimes those were just very random things, but we're still good friends.
Yes. Yeah. Or, professionally too. Again, I can hear back years ago my mom saying, "Don't burn bridges," which sounded so
Yes.
ridiculous and antiquated, but oh my goodness, is it true?
It
So
really
true.
it's very, very true. I feel like if you don't have to leave on a bad note, just don't leave on a
Just
bad note. You never
hold on
know.
to those negative emotions, I know. Look, I mean, if people are nasty, yeah, that you should never take irreprehensible behavior from anyone, but I just meant in terms of professionally, if you can move on with grace, it will always be helpful to you down the road.
Exactly. There's some situations where, okay, we get it, but
Yeah.
generally speaking, if you just need to leave and be like, "Okay, this wasn't a great fit for me, I'm moving on,"
Yep.
no hard feelings, always the better option.
Totally.
All right, well, let's talk through a few specific scenarios that I think people might be interested in. So, I'm going into my 3rd year of law school. I don't have a post graduation job offer, very common scenario. I've been thinking about ways to meet people in my desired field, but I don't feel like there's any reason anybody would want to talk to me or help me out. Do you have ideas?
Well, this is an important time to do a self-assessment, the gather phase, and think about not only what your superpowers are, but what do you like to do? And maybe what do you not like to do? And I have a lot of people say, "I don't know." Ask your friends, ask your fellow students, ask your professors, ask your family, ask your dog. People will give you honest feedback if they care about you, and people in your lives wanna help and wanna be helpful. So, to me, start with the people you know and ask them what your superpowers are, and then lead with that. And if you're having difficulty in your own community making connections and, on all the different LinkedIn and various platforms, I always recommend in this day and age, there's 1.7 million nonprofits in the US alone. Many of them could use legal counsel. Now, I know you can't on the paper until you get
Right.
your law, past the bar, et cetera, but you could be helping and providing guidance to a nonprofit organization of things they should be cautious about and things they should be thinking about. And again, just take San Francisco, where you are based part of the time. Think of all the local nonprofits that could use help. And that's a stellar way to meet people who may be different from yourself, but have similar values. And you also are able to add new and innovative things to your resume so that when it comes time to be applying for positions, you are that much more versatile and unique. So that would be my answer to that question.
No, that's such a great point. I think, and law students and lawyers also have the pro bono option, which when
Mhm.
I was looking to leave my big law firm and wanted to completely transition and had a very brief moment of thinking maybe my path was to start a family law practice. Ha ha. That's what I did. I got a pro bono case. That case convinced me after 3 years of working on it that I did not want to do family law. But as part of that, they gave an entire spreadsheet of potential mentors. So I took that, I looked at this list, and then I said, "Oh, this person looks interesting. I'd like to speak with her." And she called. She's perfectly willing to have me come over and chat for 30 minutes. And by the end of it, it's giving me advice on how to start my firm and how I should do this and blah, blah, blah. I mean, I in the end luckily decided that was not the path for me, but
Mhm.
that was so easy in a lot of ways. All right, next question. I moved for law school and I feel lonely. I'm super busy. I don't really seem to have time to meet new people or even hang out with my classmates that maybe I know a little bit, even though I'd love to do that. Everybody just seems to have their own stuff going on. What can I do?
Be a host. Invite,
Hmm.
okay? When we sit here and we expect others to do the inviting, we miss out, right? Now, before the introverts come wanting to club me to the reins, may I recommend you don't have to do this alone. So pick one or two others in your class and do it together and ask each person to bring two or three others. And by then you're up to 10 or 12 people. And that way you are creating engagement rather than depending on others. Okay.
I think that's
You're
such a great idea.
yeah, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Go for a walk. You can meet in a park. I mean, depending on where you're in law school, if you're a listener, you could be doing this all year long.
Maybe not in New York City where I was, but
Where did
um,
you go to law school?
I was at Columbia.
Oh, okay.
Very nice certain seasons of the year and probably didn't want to leave the house certain other days.
Well, no, with climate change, that's changing rapidly,
That
unfortunately.
is true.
Right.
For some reason, I mean, I guess just came naturally in some ways to me. My roommates and I were always the ones we would throw huge parties. I mean, like huge parties in our three-bedroom apartment. But we had one our second year, and it was sort of funny. So, it was a fun party, whatever. And I showed up my first day to be a TA for a class, and this guy I didn't recognize was we were all standing around outside waiting for the room to open. Says, "Oh yeah, I think I saw you at this party the other night." And I was like, "Huh." Yeah, I'm like, "That was my house. I don't know how you were there. And also, I'm your TA."
Oh,
And
my God.
he just sort of went white and was like, "Oh." So you just never know who you're going to meet. I think he eventually switched sections, so he didn't have to be in my section. But yeah, we definitely had a lot of fun and met a lot of interesting people, and people would bring their friends, and obviously people we didn't even know were there. Next question. I'd like to keep in touch with people I met in my summer job. I've heard that's a good idea, but I feel really awkward just kind of randomly emailing them to say hi or to get coffee. I mean, they're probably just going to forget about me anyway, right? Like, as soon as I leave, what should I do?
Follow up. And don't follow up by just saying, "Oh, it was nice meeting you." Follow up and mention something that you actually conversed about, something that was memorable. But don't wait. Don't wait 2 weeks. Don't wait a week. Try to do it the next day while it's fresh.
Right. And I feel like, if these are people that you worked with over the summer, particularly if you were a summer associate or something, I mean, at a law firm, part of that experience was designed to help you
Yeah.
connect with people. So it's not going to be odd if you then follow up with somebody a month
No.
later. And again, like, hey, this article I saw reminded me of you, or
Exactly.
even if it's a situation where people are going to be going back to that firm, it's great. They want you to stay in touch. I think
Of
there's just
course.
I mean, how do you help people get over this idea that somehow I feel like a lot of people think they're a burden if they are contacting people or trying to connect or stay in touch?
I hate to hear that. I absolutely hate to hear that because think about what it means when you get a note that isn't asking you for anything, but more just letting you know that you're being thought of. There's nothing better because most of the time when people reach out to you, they're asking for something and it means it's something you have to add to your list. I have a running list right next to me here that every time I get an email saying, "Can you introduce me to this person? I have to add it to the list because if not, I would lose track." Now, I just do that for a lot of people. So, it's part and parcel to like kind of my role as a connector. However, in this case, you we need more good dopamine in the world. And the way to get more good dopamine is people just unbeknownst for no reason reaching out and sending articles, sending just good juju into the universe. I think it might help tip the scale given we are living in the most vitriolic times, at least in my lifetime.
That is very true. I always love it when we get an unsolicited
Yes,
note from somebody through
or
the
text,
contact form.
or a
Like,
voicemail, or a WhatsApp, or a DM, you
yeah,
know?
and we get notes saying, "I listened to the podcast, like, it's so helpful." We have a bar one, and we do a lot of substantive law topics. We've literally had people write and say, "You know what? I listened to that podcast. I I got this question on the bar exam. I was freaking out. I couldn't remember the law, and then I literally heard Lee, my business partner, I heard Lee's voice in my head walking me through the question, and I calmed down enough to write it, and I think that's why I passed." Like, That makes my week.
Exactly. Exactly. Or just like in the morning when you first wake up, if there's a WhatsApp from a friend who lives overseas that just says, you popped in my brain yesterday and I wanted to say hi.
I love that. I was actually thinking last night of a friend of mine who lives abroad and was like, "Oh, I should reach out to her and see if she can send me a cute baby picture." But then I didn't do it because I thought it'd be too late. So today I will reach out and I will send that WhatsApp. All right. Well, our last question. I feel like I forgot how to talk to people in the pandemic. How
Yeah.
can I start to get better at small talk and about making connections in real life when it still seems a little weird?
Well, first of all, you're not the only person feeling that way whoever asked that question. But several things. One, try to remember to make it more about the other person and not about yourself. And think of questions to have in your back so that when you do meet with people, you have them at the ready. Okay. If anybody decides to read my book, I have 10 questions in one of the chapters to have in your pocket. And, to give you an example, if you're talking to somebody, you just say to them, what was the last series on Netflix that you saw that you loved? Or if you could solve any problem in the world and finances weren't an issue, what would that be? Right? And then just sit back and listen. And that means you don't feel awkward because you're not sitting there trying to talk about yourself or what the latest and greatest is in your life. Um, and then, keep it's not hard to keep up to date with what's happening in the world. But my aunt, who's now 96, crazily, years and years ago, told me that she would before she would go to an event, she would listen to at the time, I don't know what the program was on NPR, but it would be like our All Things Considered or
Right.
Morning Edition, just for a few minutes. And boy, that would give you everything from sea otters to AI to, I mean, a plethering of things to talk about. But honestly, make it more about listening rather than talking. And you'll find a wealth of things to learn and to follow up on.
Right. And I think lawyers in general love to talk about themselves. Most of them
Right.
probably don't have enough social interaction. So, I always found, when I was at these summer associate lunches or something at the law firm where it's you and, a couple of attorneys and a few other summers, and everyone's just kind of sitting awkwardly around, like, oh gosh, what are we supposed to talk about? And some of them went the direction of pop culture, whatever, what's on NPR. But then other ones, there was one partner who was in a very, very specific, like very specific practice area. He was probably one of a handful of people in the entire world who did this, but he loved to talk about it. So you could literally just go to lunch with him and be like, "Oh, what kind of stuff are you working on now?" And he would just go and go, and he loved it, and he loved you, and he was like, "This person's the greatest. We should definitely
Oh,
make them an offer," because nobody wanted to listen to him, and I felt so bad for him. Like, he just
that's
wanted to be
boring.
listened to, even if it was on a really boring and really specific topic.
Right. Oh my goodness.
Oh man, I learned a lot about. I'm not gonna say what the topic is because people might even but I learned a lot about a very obscure and boring, frankly, topic that
I love
summer.
it. I love
But,
that.
he just wanted people to hear him. And I think that's so much of it. People just wanna be heard and they wanna feel like you're listening to them, and I
And
mean,
caring.
and
So
if you can
kind.
be that person who says, "Tell me about your day, tell me about your life," like, people wanna talk about it, then you don't have to say anything.
Exactly. Bingo.
That if you later follow up with an article that's like, "Oh, this came across my
Yeah.
desk on this really specific thing," they're gonna be like, "This person is amazing. I wanna hire them.
Yeah.
Absolutely."
Well, because they're thinking out of the that's I hate to use this term, but they're thinking outside of the box. They're thinking about things beyond law reviews and legalities, which
Yeah.
I think law school students are thinking about a lot. I live next door to the Brooklyn Law School, so I see law
Oh,
students all the time
yeah. You see
on
them,
my
like, scurrying around, looking nervous, looking
yeah.
stressed. But I think people do lose sight of that because, it's such an academic environment, but really what you bring away from it are the connections. It's not so much what you learned, which is gonna be changing anyway.
Yeah. No, that's so true.
I remember I interviewed with a judge and she had a picture on her wall of her first year study group. And, this was 30 years ago. And she told me that. She's like, these are the things that actually matter in law school. It's not what you're learning, it's the people. And I thought that was so interesting.
I love that. Damn.
Yeah. No, she still had that photo and everybody who came to interview with her, she made them look at it and said, "This is what you need to be taking away." All right. Well, we're about out of time here. Any final thoughts you would like to share?
No, actually, thank you.
We're done. We said everything there is
Oh,
to
I didn't
say
mean it
about
like that.
connecting.
I mean, I think just, just to reiterate, to try to take the anxiety out of this and think of it over the long haul rather than just collecting business cards, which is
Yeah.
when we think of networking. And think of it, it doesn't all have to be done by tomorrow or by the time you graduate. It's more over your lifetime. But we
Yeah.
have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, so it's a good reminder to listen more than we speak.
Oh, I
When
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think just getting out of that transactional mindset is really the key because it's not about who am I gonna meet who can give me a job right now. It's like, that's not gonna
No,
happen. It's not gonna
no.
happen, you know?
Yeah, take that
That's
out of
that's
the
not how
equation,
things work.
right?
But you need to have this community of people that you can call upon when you need something and you can help them when they need something because that's kind of how the world operates, you know?
Oh, so well said.
All right, Susan. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And remind me again how people can find out more about you and reach out.
On the social web, Susan McP1 is my handle, and they can find more about my company at mcpstrategies.com. And lastly, my book can be found anywhere, The Lost Art of Connecting.
Awesome. Well, I hope people pick that up, read it, take it to heart. Thank you so much for joining us. And thanks everyone for watching. And please subscribe so you don't miss anything. And you can check out lawschooltoolbox.com and reach out with any questions.